Hello, everybody. Welcome to another office hour. I am Claire Moon, and I am coming to you live from not the Beige Cave. It's not the Beige Cave this time. I am in a new location. I moved, so a little disheveled, a little unprepared, maybe a little bit more than normal. But yeah, look we got lavender, we got gray, we got a plant because now I have windows. So I have real plants, and they're out in the open. What direction am I facing right now? That's west. Yeah, I've got a western and a southern window now versus living for a year with only one northern window. And this is a whole house. I think the sound is probably bad just because I have nothing in here yet. So it's pretty echoey. So I apologize for that. Hopefully it's at least coming through the mic. If you're joining us today, anyway, why we're here. This is astrology time. It's astrology Q&A time. I did put a call out for questions on Instagram today, and I got a bunch of really good ones. So, I might just start doing these longer than an hour. I might just cut them off because I'm actually getting so many good questions and they come every time. And maybe I'd mentioned this last time, but I might do these more frequently. But this is not cutting it. It's not enough. So I'm going to increase this somehow, either by just going longer or more frequently. So we'll see, but we got a lot of good ones. So I'll give you the cliff notes about what we're going to talk about today, so you can at least decide if you're interested. And if you're not, you can take off. Feel free to come and go as you please. This is live after all, just for funsies. But my name is Claire Moon. I'm an astrologer. I've been an astrologer since 2016. That's when I started. So it's been, what is that? 7 years. I've done one Saturn quarter. And before that, in a past life, I was a pharmacist for 9 years. I was in the industry for 13. And in that time, and this is just for people who aren't aware, I think a lot of you are usually aware who show up regularly. I was a pharmacist, but I was also a university instructor, and I would teach pharmacy students. And so I've always kind of been in the teaching realm. And I'm bringing it to now astrology instead of pharmacy and all that good stuff. I'm going to get the clock up here eventually, but before we do, let me just check in. If you look over to I don't know which side of the screen it is, but the right side of your computer screen, there should be a live chat. If you have questions live, throw them in there. I'm going to be trying to keep up with the chat really well on this. You do not have to be here in order to have a question answered. If you ever want to just DM me on Instagram, if you have a question you want me to cover for this, that's cool. And if you're watching this later, thank you. Thanks for joining us. Not in real time, but eventually. If you are getting help from this, hit like, hit subscribe if you want to keep up with my works. We got a bunch of familiar faces. We got the astrologer Fionn Cleary. Yeah, you've been working on a project. Check out Fionn Cleary's work. They have a website, I believe. Throw it in the chat, please. I'll say it. They're like an artist, comedian person, also an astrologer. We got FG. We got the good Reverend Kai is back. We have Susie Robertson. Hi, Susie. Nice to see you. We have Cindy. Cindy's back. I think you're back. I feel like I remember your name. Maybe I'm just psychic. Thank you on the congratulations. Yeah, I'm really excited because so what's really funny is something that's been with me the whole time that I've been doing all of this stuff has been this painting that I got out of the dumpster. And it's going to go back, and it's finally going to be back behind me. It wasn't at the last place because I wasn't able to, but we're finally going to have the dumpster painting coming on back, just like old times. Yeah, I'm really excited. I'm super happy. And I'm going to give my life example here as like a good testament later to why we need context to make predictions, because it's kind of hard to make predictions sometimes. If it's too far ahead and you don't have the full context of what's going to happen. And we all know how quick our lives can change sometimes. So I'm going to talk about that a little later. Before I do, let me just run off some of the things we're going to talk about today. I'm sorry to everyone on Instagram who sent me really awesome questions. Usually I like to respond to y'all one by one, because I am just overwhelmed with life right now with moving. I didn't respond to anybody, but I'm going to answer your questions anyway. So we've got essential dignity versus accidental dignity. Which one is more important? So we're going to talk about that. When we're reading natal charts, asking if I use whole sign versus Placidus versus others. So we'll have that discussion. Cliff notes so far, the answers for both of these questions are both and. I'm not going to bury the lead. It's both and, but I will elaborate. We're going to talk about the nature of the opposition being Saturn, so the Saturnian nature of the opposition. We're going to talk about grand water trines or grand anything trines. We're going to talk about triplicities of the sectolite. It's such a, that one is so good. Lakai, a friend of the show, is asking about that. And I might save that for another time. We'll see, because I want to spend a little bit of time on it, but I really love it. And I learned triplicity ruler techniques and things from Dr. Jen Zart. I'm going to link the stuff below as usual. Someone asked about the moon's apogee and perigee, and like black moon Lilith and the white moon Lilith. And I don't know anything about that, but I wanted to crowdsource, because this is where, when I don't know something, that's the nice thing about having this live, is that like a bunch of people show up and then I can ask you all. So if anyone has any good resources, any people who have thoughts about black moon Lilith, the white moon, and the moon's apogee and perigee and all that stuff, put it in the chat, and then I'll find it and link it below and all that good stuff. Because I don't know a darn thing about that. I got into a rabbit hole of the esoteric astrology, or no, not esoteric astrology. It's just the esoteric something or other. Let me find it for a second. I want to say the guy's name. It's a YouTube channel. Dr. Justin Sledge of Esoterica. Bunch of cool videos about Lilith on that. A lot of history about Lilith. So if you're interested in Lilith, that's where I'm starting right now, is with Dr. Justin Sledge over at Esoterica. So go check out their channel. And that brings me to my last announcement before we run into our first question. SP Hall, luminaries in and out of sect. If anyone is familiar with SP Hall, they are an astrologer. Can't remember where they're based, but they have this great podcast called Luminaries in and Out of Sect, and they basically talk about the moon. It's a really great moon podcast, and they're branching out and talking about other things too now, but they just made a YouTube channel. So all of those episodes are being put up on YouTube. So go check that out. I will link all of these things eventually. But check out SP Hall, Luminaries in and Out of Sect on YouTube. I think that's it. Let me pull up. Yeah, Reverend Kai here is saying that Dr. Sledge is amazing. Yeah, totally. Just a wealth of knowledge. And I went into a huge rabbit hole. The video about Yahweh is really good. I listened to one about something about the Kabbalah. I don't know. Yeah, learning all kinds of new words. And two, I'm going to be bouncing around. I lost my stool. And I just recently found it, and it's in the basement, and it's like too awkward for me to lift by myself. So I'm just like standing, and I might keep standing. So this might be my Venus retrograde in the 7th, my way of presenting to my audience in the 7th. We're bouncing around now. Okay. I'm going to bring up the clock, and we're going to start talking about stuff. So let's check one more thing. Yes, FG, we are live. If it wasn't obvious. Oh, sorry. Let's see. I don't think anyone had anything else to say. Okay. So the first question is about essential and accidental dignity. And the difference between, and the question was, which is more important in looking at a natal chart or electional chart, horary chart, whatever chart we have? Before I run into that question, which again, I put the answers both and, just a reminder, I had to actually remind myself of this kind of embarrassingly. So if anyone ever if this is a good testament to we can learn so many things. And along the way, there's little foundational things that maybe we didn't get totally perfectly understood. And so I refreshed and made sure that I understood, and I used the internet, like Wikipedia, with caution, but also On the Heavenly Spheres by Elena Avelar and Luis Ribeiro. But basically, essential dignity is the kind of dignity or strength or lack of strength that a planet gets from its zodiacal position. So the zodiac placement that it has. So for instance, like Venus in Libra would be an example. Can we get her there? There she is. So Venus in Libra. Venus is in their domicile here. That is one example of essential dignity, and all the things that come from the zodiacal signs. So domicile, being, the ruler of the domicile, being exalted, being in fall. What am I missing? All of those domicile, rulership, exile, fall, exile. That was the other one. And everything else and triplicity, because if we think about what makes up a zodiac sign, we have the element, the modality, the ruler. So the triplicity rulership is another thing. We can even start to talk about maybe face, term or bound, and those things though don't have like a counterpart, whereas domicile and exaltation have their fall and exile counterparts. The more minor types of dignity there don't, and so they're not necessarily always included. But that's essential dignity. It's kind of like what you're coming in with. If we want to anthropomorphize the planets and think about who they are and what they're coming in with, just at baseline. So general condition. Everything else is accidental. So for instance, visibility, being combust or not, being in the 12th house or the 11th house, the house placement. Are you angular or not? Are you close to an angle? Are you being goaded by the angles? Any of those types of things are accidental. And the question was, which types of dignity, which types of which bucket of pros or cons is more important? And my answer is it's going to depend greatly on the situation, which I know is a super annoying answer, but it's the truth. And I just looked at like the Wikipedia page for accidental and essential dignities, and they gave a really good example of what this could be. And they gave the example of, say, a really well-made ring with really expensive jewels on it and stuff. That would be really high essential dignity, like say a Venus in Libra or a Venus in Taurus or something. But say it's in the 12th, so it's lost. It's a beautiful ring, but it's lost. Or we can imagine someone who maybe they weren't born with much, or they didn't maybe they had some challenges that were just inborn to the circumstances they came into the world with. But then they had some other accidental dignity that was really helpful. And maybe that speaks to, okay, maybe I have, say, for instance, I've got probably ADHD or something, surprise. But I have other influences like, I don't know, white privilege and stuff that help me out. So those are just some examples. Or maybe, on the other end of things, another example I thought of, or an analogy would be maybe someone who is marginalized, who's very genius or something, but they never have the advantage to get out there and thrive or whatever. So that would be like different types of those dignities coming together. It totally depends on the admixture and the context. So that's my final answer. I feel like we can get into opinions though about it's very would you rather. It's like would you rather have this horrible thing happen or this horrible thing, or would you rather have this advantage or this advantage in the zombie apocalypse? That is kind of what we're ending up with. And so yeah, I can give you my opinions on that all day long, but technically speaking, I'm taking that case by case. So that was an awesome question. Loved it very much. And it that's the great thing about being a teacher and telling people that you're going to teach is that a lot of times you got to look stuff up if you're me. But that was a good question from Cecilia. So thank you, Cecilia. I appreciate that. Let's check in before the next one. We're going to talk about the houses. We're going to open that chestnut. we're going to just peek into that can of worms, and then we're going to slap the lid back shut. we're not going to get too far into it. Okay. It looks like everybody's doing okay. So the next one comes from Kun, and Kun asks, when it comes to reading natal charts, when do I use whole sign versus placidus versus others? For the most part, I use whole sign, but like in my mind, I am envisioning like where the angles are, kind of like what you visually see when you have a placidus or another quadrant-based chart. So what's the difference? So for whole sign houses, what I'm really doing with that is choosing house topics. Wherever the planet falls, say, Sun, Mars. God, when is this? This is this upcoming November. I'm totally pumped for this, by the way. I randomly ended up here, but I'm really looking forward to whatever this cool, like Mars Scorpio situation is here. But in any event, these planets are going to be about 6th house stuff. So I use the whole sign houses to determine house topics. When I'm looking at like what is more visually displayed by the quadrant systems in terms of angles, I'm looking at what planets are close to the angles by bodily conjunction, or I guess what would be a good example here? Maybe the moon, or by degree. So I'm looking for dynamic angular strength. And so say that we've got a situation where the midheaven is in the 10th. Whoops. Hold up. Okay. Like this. This is good. Although I'm going to back it up so it's a little bit more easy to see. Oh, dang it. That was too far. Okay. No. There. Good enough. Okay. So we can see we've got whole sign houses. So let's just pretend that the moon was at like 28 degrees of Libra here. Let's just pretend like the moon was on the one side of the midheaven by degree, versus a different situation where the moon was on this side of the midheaven. So, and let's say this is a natal chart. So I'm looking at this person, they've got a moon in Libra in the 10th house. So the moon is going to describe it's going to be involved with things of the 10th house. A lot of our lunar significations are going to be witnessed through 10th house topics and experiences. At the same time, there's going to be a difference depending on which side of the midheaven that moon is on. Is it on the angular side? Is it moving higher and higher into the sky and culminating? Or is it moving away from that and is cadent? So there's still those angular and cadent sides of the angle, even if we're using whole sign houses. However, in this example, then we can see how different that looks when we change our calculations. Like I'll just throw it in alcabitious here. Does that work? Yeah. So now here we've got that 26 degrees of Libra being shown by this special arrow, right? So I don't have to, let's say we got that example again where the moon is at, God, that's a horrible moon. I think I got to get better at drawing moons, which is really ironic because that's in my name. And it's like it's the hardest one for me to draw. But here, and now this quadrant-based system that I've chosen, now we can see that the moon is on the angular side or the cadent side much more readily. It's easier to kind of notice, I think, with quadrant-based system. But it would change the house topic. So that's kind of interesting, huh? So when I'm choosing house topics, I use whole sign. I'm still thinking about all this angular strength stuff. But now if you are using a quadrant-based system and you're using that to assign house topics to a planet or to something or to a sign, then you're going to get a different interpretation. And neither of them are more right or wrong. So I got to say that it's just kind of like if this is the person or the situation, it's getting a different angle. So maybe whole sign is looking at it from this angle, like getting the frontal kind of view. And then maybe like alcabitious is getting it from like the profile point of view. So we're just kind of getting different angles on the situation, but we are going to read these things a bit differently. So again, I personally use whole sign houses, use whatever you want. I know, I'm more visual. And so there's certain things might rub me a certain way versus someone else who takes in information differently. And a quadrant-based system might make more sense, even just like how you can look at it. So I never try to, say that one is going to be better for a situation or other. And then another thing to consider too is like when I am learning things, like when I learned the triplicity system from Dr. Jen Zart, she was teaching it with alkabishous houses. And so that's what I learned it with and what I used it with. Eventually I started to use it with whole sign. And now I kind of look at both and I compare both. If I'm really digging into the triplicity scheme of things with like a question about money over the course of life, because you can look at like money in the first, the second, the third chunk of your life or something like that. I might look at it through the lens of whole sign and then pick up alkabishous and look at it how my teacher taught me years ago or whatever. And then kind of come together and see what it looks like. So that's what I think about that. I think, yeah, I think that answers it. When do you use it though? Yeah, I guess, I don't know if I answered that directly, but when do I use? I'm kind of using both of them at the same time, I guess. And I'm trying to kind of reconcile the two views that I get from both. This is demonstrated really well by the Rhetorius, the Egyptian grammarian example. You can see even the ancient folks like Rhetorius trying to, oh, now I lost my bookmark. I just have the moon bonding, of course, that has a bookmark. You can see ancient people also trying to kind of reconcile these things. So this is not a new problem or I guess it's not a problem. It's a feature, not a bug, in my opinion. It's a feature. There are going to be situations though, like say when you're trying to find a predominator, or, like life timing techniques where different astrologers are using quadrant houses and other ones are using whole sign, and that changes the answers that you get. So even like the length of life techniques, there's both people using different things or people using both things. Yeah, hopefully that answers that. But that's a great question. And it's one that comes up a lot, as anyone on Twitter knows, like every 6 months, everyone argues about all of this. All right. Oh, Kana's here. Hi. It's good to see you. Welcome. Let me know if you have any follow-up questions. Hopefully that did it. Oh, we got Lee here. Good to see you. Thanks for tuning in again. Taylor is asking, what would the midheaven lot of fortune conjunction mean? I don't have examples of people off the top of my head that have that. I will just answer kind of generally speaking. And I'm not a huge, like I use the lots in terms of calculating other things like zodiacal releasing. I do a lot of zodiacal releasing work. I don't interpret the lots themselves in natal charts that often, unless it's like really, really close to something. But pretty much whatever the lot of fortune is next to, it's going to give a signification of fatedness. The lot of fortune is much more about what is given through fate, for better or for worse, that we don't have control over. Very much like, your crops have been hit by blight and there's nothing you can do about it, versus the lot of spirit has much more to do with our will and what we choose to do here. So that is a whole different story that we do seem to have more of a choice in. But so again, whatever lot of fortune is next to, it's going to impart that kind of fated, whether it's like a lottery, a good one or a bad one, right? That's at least my perspective on it. But that's what I have for that. But a good question. And people who are better at lots than I am, there's a lot of them. But the people that come to mind are Kira Ryberg, Kira, and then her last name is RYB as in boy, ERG. They are like in France, I think, but they're very cool and they know about lots. I actually purchased one of their worksheets on lots very recently. I should link this below. I haven't read it yet. And before I do that, I have to learn how to calculate charts by hand because I just bought that class from Demetra. So I'm going to try to do math and I'm like, I don't want to do it, but I have to do it. So yeah, I'll get back to you on that. Also, Cameron of Omega Astrology. Yeah, hold on. Ooh, this is another exciting thing too. We're getting distracted now. We're done with questions for a second. Oh, I can't get it out. I have this cool, I have this tube. Actually, does it say on here? Yeah, Cameron Cassidy of Omega Astrology. This is totally unrelated thing, but they make really cool posters. And I was like, oh my God, I get to put this up on my wall. Let's see if I got it open. Oh, let's see if I can get it out without hurting it. You can buy, there's a few different sizes. I'm going to get it framed so then I can look at it and like stroke my chin hairs like a wizard. Here we go. I'm so excited. I got this a really long time ago, but I knew I was moving, so I didn't want to put it up. It's like a giant cheat sheet. Look at that. Isn't that incredible? I don't even know how to read all of it. I got the one with the fixed stars on it, but yeah. So anyway, lots though. Cameron is really good at lots. Kyra Ryberg's really good at lots. Jake, he's like the only Jake doing astrology that's got a website, I think. He's really good at lots. The oracular Jake, that's his name. He's good at lots. Yeah, those are all people I would recommend for lots. Yeah. I'm so excited to put that up. Fun. Okay. Let's see. What else? Lee says esoterica and foolish fish. I should check out foolish fish. I'll put it in a tab for later. Thank you, Lee. I appreciate that. How do I feel about yads? A lot of astrologers don't even acknowledge them, but I have a significant one and I don't understand. I wish you could see my chart. Yeah, I mean, we can talk about your yad sometime, but we would have to see the whole chart. I look at yads as just the aspects that they're made out of that I work with. It's kind of interesting, like the word yad, it's said to be like the finger of God. But if we look back, and I'm not a linguist, and I'm going to totally annihilate butcher when I'm about to try to explain that I learned once. But basically the word yod, it's like a finger pointy kind of symbol. And there used to be like a little stick with like a finger on it that you would use to flip pages of sacred texts. And I think that was called a yod, but there's like literally something in the evolution of language from like Demotic and Phoenician and all of those to the languages that we more understand now. But the word yod like literally just goes back to like hand or finger or something like that. Okay. So as far as like the mystical part of it and being like the finger of God, that part, I have no idea how it got to like where it is now. I feel like there's like hundreds of years of history. I don't know about how we got to what I know about like the ancient word versus where it is now symbolically in modern astrology. When I'm looking at a yod, I'm looking at two planets that are making a sextile and are really working harmoniously together in the nature of Venus, connection, growth, good times, joy, good stuff when we got a sextile, a little bit more free flowing. I can't remember which ancient person said that a sextile is half as good as a trine. So, I mean, take that for what it's worth. And then those two planets, there's a third planet that's in aversion. And so that third planet is not in on the action. They are kind of separate or disjointed or removed from what the other two planets are doing very well together. And so that's where it can get kind of funky. Now, half of the time that people bring me a yod, I find some other type of minor connection between those planets that kind of traditionally invalidates that it's a yod, because there's actually quite a bit of like, say, like a reluctant conjunction where you've got like Mars in Scorpio and another planet in Aries. Those two signs are going to have some kind of sympathy, or if it's like a antisha or contra antisha type example where there's that other kind of sympathy. So check your yod. So if you've got a yod, make sure it doesn't have some of these other mitigating kind of sympathies between signs, like about ascensional time or, all the other ones. There's so many, and they're all in this book on the heavenly spheres. But yeah, check your yod and see if there aren't some other connecting places, because that might help kind of just speak to a mitigation. The other thing I like to do with a yod is I like to look at the other planets that are involved that might be able to kind of bring those other two planets things together through a third party, where, okay, we might have to take a bunch of extra steps in order to bring these significations of these houses that are in aversion together, but it's possible with that extra journey, if you will. So that's how I treat yods. But yeah, it's something that, I mean, I feel like probably I get like a yod every other month. Yeah, I've seen a few yods, but yeah, I have no idea how to interpret them from a modern lens, and they may have some totally different things to say about it. Yeah, yods. All right. What's next? Who's next? So we've got, yeah, well, let's talk about aspects then for a second. Let's talk about the water trine, and then we'll talk about the opposition. And I guess water trine, any trine, my big thing about trines is that they are free flowing. So whatever planets we're working with in a trine, what is being shared between them is doing so with ease. And why is that? It's because, let's see, do we have an example? Let's just do a sign-based example. Let's pretend like these current Earth planets are by degree, but even by sign, we do have a bit of an Earth trine situation happening. Planets that are in signs that are in a trine, they share a lot in common. They share the same, they're all nocturnal here. So they share the same polarity, the same gender. They share the same triplicity, the same element. They share, we got feminine, masculine. So when planets are in signs that share things in common, they have affinity, then they can have a more easeful relationship. The fewer things that those planets have in common, say, Virgo and Libra, we've got day, night, masculine, feminine, air, earth, ruled by Venus, ruled by Mercury. Very, very, very different. They don't have anything in common. They're in aversion, right? Not to say there aren't those other minor ways of signs connecting, but when we're just looking at kind of the foundations of things, yeah, this is very, very connected. The other thing is that a trine is of the nature of Jupiter. So the trine is going to be experienced as growthy, balancing. It is going to be something that is stabilizing, potentially abundant, or having opportunity. So there's an easefulness that comes from there when we think about like benefics like Jupiter or Venus, and how they are benefic, not because they are morally good, but more because they provide the stable conditions for growth. When we have stable conditions for growth, that produces ease. When we have ease, that produces stable conditions for growth. Very different than malefics of the nature of like the opposition and the square. Those are unstable, extreme types of conditions that are not suitable for growth. So that is more of the lens we're coming from. So anyway, of the nature of Jupiter here, whatever's between these places is going to flow freely, abundantly. It may cause growth. It may have opportunity built in. There might be some kind of goodwill shared between planets here. And then I guess one other thing to note too is that planets that share the same element, it's like having the wind at your back. That's how Demetra George describes it in her book in Ancient Astrology, or like having the support of friends too, people cheering you on in that way. That is of the nature of Jupiter as well. If we think about Jupiter being in charge of like crowds and cheering and encouragement and things like that. So we have to think then, what's the context? Because if it's a tumor, I don't want it to grow. If it is a weed that I don't want it to grow. So growth is not inherently good or bad. Opportunities, actually not always inherently good or bad. Sometimes things just happen. So we have to look at what is it? Is it water? Then we're going to have water type themes, and the themes of those signs really strong and flowing freely, for better or for worse. So I think this is kind of a thing where it's like the coin with two sides. With great power comes great responsibility. If you have a lot of water, make sure you have a good vessel to hold it and that's clean. If you've got a lot of fire with great action and, getting shit done, you're also probably going to have a hard time resting. If it's air, you're going to be thinking a lot and it might be hard to not be restless as shit. If you're earth, that's got its own version of like, you can either be very like materially gifted in this 3D world, and at the same time, you might be rigid or something like that. Everything in astrology is a coin with two sides, including a grand trine of any kind. So, another thing too, is when we think about water and earth in particular versus air and fire, if we've got a lot of water in the chart, and, already if we're dealing with a trine or something like that, that means a lot of planets are in that element. We're getting a lot of responsiveness. So that nocturnal feminine quality of being receptive, being responsive, versus the diurnal masculine air fire thing of being active and influencing the world around you. If you've got a bunch of water, it might feel, and this is, all other things aside, maybe you have a bunch of fire and air in your chart somewhere else that offsets this, or, insert any other balance of elements. But a lot of water, might be passive. It might literally just not feel that motivation to begin or to, do the fire kind of external out there in the world thing. It might take some nudging and prodding to get the water person to go and change or do a thing. Versus waiting and kind of being more receptive or responsive to what happens around it, and then just responding to that. So, and I'm a water person, so I know. Ask me how I know. I don't have a water trine though. So actually, well, I do, depending on who you include. So that's my answer for that. And again, you can use any element with that. That's not just water. Thank you so much, Lee. Holy cow. I got a super sticker thingy. I just started doing these where people can actually like give me a tip or like, I feel it's hard for me to ask, but I do need money for rent. So I appreciate that, Lee, so much. Thank you very much. If anyone is interested in ancient symbols or the PGM, I'm not sure what the PGM is, but maybe other people do. Dr. Kirsten Zwiza, D as in Delta, Z as in Zebra, W-I-Z-A, Kirsten Dwiza, is a star in that field, a stellar Egyptian scholar of note. And yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for the recommendation. I think it's really important that we learn historical stuff, not just because we're kind of forced to if we're doing traditional astrology in some ways, but it really does help to just understand where the concepts came from in the first place and makes you an even sharper astrologer. If you understand that the benefics and malefics, for instance, came from an agricultural, agrarian kind of worldview, that helps us understand. And then we can look at a chart and see Venus and Jupiter and not be like, oh, that person's a good person, and see Mars and Saturn and be like, that person's a bad, so that's how history helps us. So it's really important. Yeah. Amazing. Let's see. What else? Am I missing anything? Yeah. Stable conditions for growth. That's the benefics. They help with that. Shauna is here. Hi, Shauna. They ask, what do I think about Jupiter and Juno? I mean, I might need something more specific than that. I could talk forever about Jupiter. I actually could not talk forever about Juno. Go to Diana Rose Harper for Juno. She knows about Juno. Actually, so there's a question about planetary gender. There's planetary gender. There's sign-based gender. They are two different things. I talked about it a lot. I think it was last month. So go to last month's office hour. I go on a whole spiel about it and I get a little twisted up. So look at I made some corrections afterwards. I misspoke on a couple notes, but I think the thing to note is that there's gender assigned by a bunch of different traditions to planets in a bunch of different ways. Same with the signs, not a bunch of different ways, but especially the planetary ones. So I'm not willing to make any comments about any of it. I think the good thing to remember at this point is that this is within a system, and again, this is where the historical stuff plays in, is when they were thinking about gender, there was a lot more to do archetypally with masculine having certain qualities of being activating and engaging and changing the world around it, versus feminine gender, which much more had to do with that passivity, receptivity, respond ability, that is different. And you need both. It's a duality pair that you need. And so some people do make a case that like the gender of the planets, it's unequal. That's why, we're bringing it up a lot, because it's like there's a lot of like boy planets and not a lot of girl planets. And so yeah, some people make a case that maybe a more symmetrical system there makes sense. I personally don't think about like planetary gender a ton, even though I do like gender them and I use those words. I kind of am fluid with it. Like I also use they a lot for them. And then sometimes I use it when I'm not anthropomorphizing planets. But it's actually not something I use in my practice a ton. I think, someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like Jyotish looks at that more, or it's part of the story more. There are other traditions. So yeah, I don't know, but I just know it's complicated. I think that's probably what I'll leave that with. And I mean, if we're looking at Jupiter in a Greco-Roman, what's that? Oh, it's my poster tube. If we're looking at Jupiter in terms of a Greco-Roman worldview, I mean, just look at the myth. Like Jupiter was going around committing sexual assault every other day, making babies, like definitely was not a lady. So yeah, we'll just leave it there. Yeah, I got a real complicated take on it. So that's my take. But thank you for asking. And please do go back. I tried to be a little bit more organized in my thoughts when I covered it earlier. Yeah. Okay. I think we're going to go back to the IG list of questions. We talked about the trines. Let's talk about oppositions being of the nature of Saturn. And this is one I get a lot. I feel like Mars and Jupiter are kind of easier to understand as the natures of a square and trine respectively. It seems that people get more questions when it comes to the opposition and the sextile. So we'll talk about the opposition here. Let's see. Do I need my chart? Sure. Let's talk about this opposition. Maybe it's a little confounding because Saturn is involved themselves, but maybe it won't matter. So we can see that planets in opposition, one thing that defines their relationship is, again, the qualities of the signs that they're in and whether those signs have affinity with each other. So we've got two signs that are both nocturnal / feminine. But there's Earth and there's water. So that's not the same. We've got Mercury and Jupiter as rulers. So that's not the same. They are both mutable. So they have that flexible, adaptable quality. So they have some things in common. So this idea that oppositions are an absolute impasse, I always hold out a little hope because at least they can have some kind of communication, some kind of connection. It's like, maybe me and this person don't like each other, but wow, we both speak the same language. And maybe there's a chance that we could reconcile because we have the ability to communicate at all, which I know is like kind of bare bones, but I'll take it. And an opposition being of the nature of Saturn, I think we can get kind of confused with that versus Mars being of the nature of the square. Both of them are the struggle aspects. And so we just think of like, challenge, but what's the nature of those two different types or archetypal buckets of challenges? Like, what is the difference between them? And so as I talk about Saturn, I might kind of juxtapose it against the square and Mars just to give kind of an example and flesh out, because I feel like in our minds, those two get melded a lot. So with Saturn, we've got what is cold, slow, barriers, delays. So yeah, sometimes I think it can feel like an impasse. I know I just said like it's not necessarily an impasse, but boy, can it feel like it. Also, it can, if a delay lasts long enough, it can look like nothing is happening. And maybe nothing is happening for a really long time. If a delay lasts long enough, it seems impassable. It's kind of like that thing where, you've got a tunnel and maybe there's a light at the end of it, but the tunnel curves. And so you're never going to see it until you're right there. So that feels very Saturnian in nature, that whole situation of just like, yeah, there's an end to it, but I can't see it. I can't even see maybe the steps I need to do to bring these two areas of life together. Because that's the other thing too, is you've got these two very different areas of life that are coming together. Let's just use the example of the first and the seventh. It's you and the other. And in some ways, inseparable peanut butter jelly sometimes. In other ways, can't live with them, can't live without them. Like seems unreconcilable. How can I care about me and care about this other person at the same time? Sometimes, not all the time, that feels really difficult to balance that. Another thing is that I think, like Saturn, it takes effort over a long period of time. It is delayed gratification. It is continual kind of grinding effort to bring balance to two places that are really different and have two different sets of priorities, two different sets of job duties. There's different things going on here. If Cancer is like a baby nursery and, Capricorn is like a paper mill, there are way different things going on here. So these planets are going to be opposed in a lot of ways. So it takes a lot of consistent, continual energy to keep that balance. Just like a teeter-totter, it usually doesn't just sit like this. It usually hangs to one side or the other. And it takes consistent energy to keep a teeter-totter like this. You have to like hold it there. So that is what an opposition can feel like sometimes. I can see people oscillating with oppositions sometimes. And, whether that oscillation going back and forth is really erratic or fast versus slower, that varies by person and situation and chart. But I do see like, we're going to do this for a while, and then we're going to go over here and do this. And again, it might be quickly kind of going back and forth between the two all the time. It might be like I spend years on this end of things, and it takes me, years to figure out how to put more onto this end of things. So, I don't know if anyone's familiar with like that symbol of kind of the oscillations coming back to a center. It's like the oppositional life starts off up here. Hopefully we can get to a place by the time we die that we're not oscillating so rapidly. And we found some way to kind of meld and work the things together. So there are ways with every single duality pair in the zodiac signs where there are ways for them to work together in harmony, but lots of consistent effort and delayed gratification. We can also just see rejection. Just know, of the nature of Saturn is rejection, no, and that can again, that could be an impasse. So when I say it doesn't have to be an impasse, that doesn't mean that impasses do not happen with oppositions. If they're going to happen, it's going to happen with an opposition, most likely, where, we don't figure out how to reconcile it maybe. And then it really is up to looking at the rest of the chart. Like in this example, how might Jupiter be helping whatever this oppositional pair is, versus, what Mars might be doing to help. So of course we always have to then, once we've got that one aspect between the two things dialed in, and we're hopefully talking to a person or talking to ourselves and getting some kind of context. Otherwise, how are we supposed to figure anything out? But then looking at the rest of the chart as well to see if there's any other mitigations or impeding influences. So how does this compare with like a square? Because that's the other struggle type of aspect. And the nature of the square is that of Mars. And I like to really compare it to the angles of the chart, which already demonstrate something of a pivot. It was called a pivot, a kentron, these places where we're going around the circle and we have these really high energy points, but even if we just look at the chart itself, we've got these squares coming up through the 1st, the 4th, the 7th, and the 10th. And these squares really speak to a place of change or pivot or transition. It's like, if we don't change through this quarter, we're just going to go flying off the circle. If we want to stay on the circle, we have to adjust or curve with it. So I like to remember that when I'm thinking about a square. Mars is effort. It is hot, versus Saturn being dry and rigid. That's what Saturn brings. That's extreme, is its dryness. That doesn't move as much. It's like congealed. It's harder to work with that type of energy, versus a square is Mars. That's action, that's energy. It can be almost too much. That's why squares have instability built in, because there's almost too much movement sometimes. So then we get, frustration, irritation, excess heat. We also get effort, motivation, all the cool Mars stuff. But a lot of what a square is about to me is like conflict, can be healthy conflict, change, adjustment. Those are the words that I really like to use. Before we had, I know now we like to think, oh, well, isn't change about like Pluto and Uranus? But before we had those two talking about change, it was usually Mars who was coming in. I love how Austin Coppock describes I think it was the first decan of Aries, where you have the axe and you're able to cut a piece of wood from one piece of wood into 2 pieces of wood. And like, what a huge transformation that is. That's a huge change. And that's just Mars by themselves. So if we put that kind of energy that I think we usually get relegated to Pluto and Uranus, put that into your squares and think about it that way. And now we got to look too, like, what do these places have in common? So like a square would be, between like Leo and Taurus, for instance, they're both fixed. But we do have one that is fire, one that is earth, one that is diurnal, one that is nocturnal. So, they have some things in common, some things to work with. These two here have some kind of antisha as well, but for them to work well together, the planets within those places, for them to work well together, whether there's planets in there or not, actually, we do probably have to do some kind of effort, change, something like that. And it might be crunchy. I really shouldn't be ever using the word crunchy for anything other than than squares. But yeah, that's how I feel about those. So hopefully that helps. That question comes from my beloved Vince. I love you so much, Vince. I'm so happy we're friends. Thank you. Farm Astrology on Twitter. I think they're Farm Astrology on IG too. I'm pretty sure. Rogue Rumagrude. I said that really wrong. Hello from New Jersey. Hello from Wisconsin. All right. Oh, thank you, Shauna King. I really appreciate that. That's so kind of you. New sub. Awesome. Put your questions in the comments. I have been really bad about answering comments for like the last month because I've been moving, but I'm hoping that my life is going to reach homeostasis here pretty soon. And I will be back and better at replying to things and answering questions in the comments. Okay. Let's see. Does anybody else? Oh, does today's chart have the Star of David? Maybe. I could probably, depends on how I got my lines set. Depends on what my calculations are set to. Okay, next question. Let's see. We've got, oh, and the grand trine question came from good friend of the show, Fallen Soap One. Thank you, Fallen. We've got, oh yeah, the triplicity. Oh, Fion's question about retrogrades of the profected Time Lords. Yeah, that was a fun one to think about. So Fion asks, what is the deal if we've got a Time Lord, which I will explain what that is in a second. And what if they are retrograde during their perfected year? So I'm going to share my little cheat sheet here with everybody. So this is a hypothetical person. But each year of the life, from birthday to birthday, one house gets highlighted, and the planet that rules over the sign in that house would be the time lord for the year. And what that means is that planet becomes more activated and alert and loud that year. And another way of putting it is that during that time lord's profected year, the natal promise that that planet brings in your chart will come forth. So basically what that planet's saying in your chart is going to be writ large and loud for the year ahead. So what happens if, say, Mercury is your time lord and Mercury is retrograde? What happened during a transit per se? So that's going to then be extra loud. Let me make sure. Did you mean that natally? Talk about retrogrades of, yeah, no. So it's if you've got a time lord, and then what happens when that, so like right now we're about to have a Venus retrograde. What happens if Venus is your time lord this year? It's even more of a big deal. So anytime there's a time lord, that planet's transits, as well as transits to that planet natally, all of that's louder. So if Venus is your time lord, then transits that hit your natal Venus, so the moon hits your natal Venus once a month, right? That's going to be louder for you for a year during that Venus year from birthday to birthday. Venus retrograde, any other transits that Venus themselves is doing in the sky, that's going to be louder. And I think the really important consequence that I was thinking about was how during a retrograde, there is a cazimi. And that cazimi point is a restart point for that planet. So for instance, we're going to have one here in about a month. We're going to have Venus and the sun come together. And when the planet and the sun meet, retrograde, when that planet is retrograde, that's the restart of their cycle with the sun. It's a synodic cycle. So this is a rebirth for Venus. And not only is it going to be a rebirth for Venus, and that's just going to be a bigger deal for you that year, also the places Venus rules. So in this hypothetical Aquarius rising chart, then the fourth house and the ninth house, those topics will get a big old reset button that year that might be a bit more meaningful than other years. So with your ninth house, maybe beliefs get a reset button. Maybe we have big reconsiderations or big changes of heart with certain things. Maybe we've got big changes in values versus, it's not just like, I've decided that the brand of fizzy water I like, I'm changing it. No, now it's like, I actually don't value kindness anymore. I'm going to be mean now. It might be like a bigger shift. So that was kind of what I came up with for that, is just like, especially a retrograde having that cazimi and that being a reset button. That's a big deal. And that's going to be, and if that's, if the natal promise of that planet is loud that year, then these changes really speak to what that planet is trying to do in your whole life, I think, in a louder way. So pay attention. I guess that's maybe the what to do is look alive. So hopefully that helps. I'm guessing, I feel like I'm kind of surprised you asked me that, because I feel like you probably could tell me just as much about that question. I'm trying to think if I've ever been, I would have to look. I don't even know if I've been through any of those myself. I've had retrogrades in my solar return chart, but it wasn't the cazimi or anything like that. Let's do a different share back here. All right, what's the next question? Pluto conjunct someone's ascendant. What is it to have Pluto conjunct your ascendant? Well, we're going to squish together Pluto things and ascendant things. That's what we're going to do. So Pluto things change. Like I was just saying, Mars has changed. Well, yeah, Pluto has changed too. It's creation, destruction. It's, I think Pluto confronts us with things it confronts us to our clinging, to our aversion, to our delusion. I think Pluto faces us with our sufferings and asks us to renounce some of these things. Pluto also has to do with power dynamics and power. So let's imagine too, if you want to look at what Pluto does to an ascendant or what Pluto does going through a first house, look at all your Capricorn rising friends. Granted, I don't think we need astrology to tell us that over the course of 15, 20 years, your life is going to look completely different than it did before. Like, yeah, that's pretty much everybody. But there is something like especially profound about the type of Pluto change that can come through a first house. And the first house is our mind, our body, our spirit. It's our general circumstances as well. So it is kind of a huge deal when it goes through the first house. And, thankfully Pluto transits are slow, so we have time to go through all of that. But yeah, I think also questions of not just change and letting go and looking at the things we cling to, but also in the first house, how am I handling power? Do I feel like I am empowered? Do I feel like I make other people feel empowered? We can be faced with external power dynamics. And a lot of those aren't weird or creepy. A lot of them are just kind of normal. Anytime you have an expert-client relationship, that expert is basically saying, hey, there's stuff that I know that you don't know. And the other person's like, I'm going to pay you for that. And there is some kind of power types of structures in that relationship, maybe even too, when you think about where the money is going and coming, that is also a power type of, it's part of the recipe in the power soup. So then we have to ask ourselves, like, how am I identifying with power? Yeah, I wanted to read some of this Epictetus Stoicism book. And this is actually, this is relevant here. It's coming up. So this book is, Chris Brennan mentioned it in passing. I don't know if he's actually going to do it or not, or put it in his course, but he had mentioned how he used to recommend meditations by Marcus Aurelius for his course for Hellenistic astrology. And now he's thinking about recommending this instead. And so I read it, and it's very good. How to Be Free. It's an ancient guide to the Stoic life. It's translated with an introduction by A.A. Long, and it's part of the Enchiridion, which took me a very long time to figure out how to say. And selections from discourses. But this is a Stoic guy, and he's talking about stuff. But when we think about power, as I read this, it says, these inferences are invalid. So he's saying these things I'm about to say are invalid. I am richer than you, therefore I am better than you. I am more eloquent than you, therefore I am better than you. But the following inferences are more cogent or correct. I am richer than you, therefore my property is better than yours. Or I am more eloquent than you, therefore my diction is better than yours. But you yourself are neither property nor diction. So you yourself, these things that make you feel powerful, they are not you. And I think that might be some kind of message about this. But yeah, I highly recommend that book. It's a quick one. Okay. So if you know me, I'm a slow reader. I have a hard time reading actual books. I do manage to do it, but it takes me a while. I'm a better listener. But this one made me feel so good because like the font is pretty big. And then on one side, it's Greek. And then on the other side, it's English. So actually, I only had to read half of these pages. I only had to read half of that book. I was like, ooh, I read a whole book. Not really. Yeah. So anyway, what else? So yeah, I guess, for me, I'm an Aquarius rising. So it's in my first, or it's about to be for a long time. And the question that I am going to be posing to myself when certain circumstances come up, when I see things trending in new ways and new directions, I'm just going to continually be asking myself if I feel like I am in power or in control of the situation or not. If I feel agency or autonomy, if I'm making sure that other people feel okay in those ways as well across the way in my seventh house, because of course, not only is Pluto going to be in my first, it's also going to be opposing my seventh. So the people with Pluto in your first natally, or people with Pluto going through your first, you're kind of exuding, or even, I shouldn't say that, I don't know that for sure, but there's a potential that we may be more magnetic, or we may just, for whatever reason, have power. And that might affect other people for better or for worse. So I guess, the message is going through your first house, be careful, be thoughtful, be loving. And when things get complicated, because Pluto is also complicated. Pluto is complex, the whole Pluto and Scorpio, definitely some kind of Venn diagram there. Like, it makes sense why the modern folks have that as a co-ruler. There's some things in common, and the complexity I find is one. And I think with Pluto going through the first, we can't really prepare for it. I don't think there's a whole hell of a lot anyone can do, except for just, my own mantra is just be kind and be honest and do your best, and try not to be a dick. It'll probably be okay. It's going to be about as okay as it's going to be if you do those things. Pluto is control. Maybe that's a good note to end on, is Pluto being control. Do we want to cling tightly to situations, or can we let go of things? And that might be easier or harder depending on your chart. Us poor fixed sign people are going to struggle because you have fixed signs. Okay. That was a good question. Let's see who asked that. And they had a Capricorn ascendant, Aaron Oliver. Thank you for that question, Aaron. Let's keep going. Let's do, I'm sorry, Lakai. I'm going to save triplicities of the sectite for next time. I'm going to start with that one because that one needs more attention and more time. And if you want to ask me a more specific question about it, otherwise I can do what I call the quick and dirty primer that I tend to do for things where it might not be the best one, but it's the one that I have. So we'll do triplicity stuff next time. I actually use it quite a bit in my practice. And for those of you who have gotten readings for me, there's a good chance I grab my book that has the tab with the triplicity rulerships, because I have a hard time. I think I've got it memorized now, but for a year, I did not have them memorized. So dear Lord, no one think that you need to memorize those things right away. It takes a while. Okay. Does anyone else have any questions? Let's see. Thank you so much, everybody. This chat is happening. It's so fun. Let's see. Oh, you know what? I just had another little thing too about that Saturn opposition stuff. Yoga. I was in yoga, and this was months ago, and we were doing downward dog. And there's this part of downward dog where you can lift up a leg, and then you're doing the tripod, right? And then you can lift up the contralateral hand, on the other side. And you're balancing on, your, say, left hand and right foot, but downward doggy, right? And the teacher was talking about how it's so difficult to have control in that circumstance. And now we're talking about Saturn and the opposition here. It takes so much energy and muscle strength and control to hold a balancing posture like that. But if you can figure it out, you can have the coolest experience of movement and shape in that context if you are able to muster it. So I think about that a lot with Saturn in the opposition is yeah, it's very difficult, but if you can manage to figure out how to balance it after building strength over time with it, the balance that you can achieve with it is very, very cool. There, we'll leave it on a hopeful note for Saturn. All right, people are bringing tarot in. I love it. I just did a tarot reading to ask if I should just concentrate on nesting because I was having workaholic anxiety. Because I was I got to actually do not work stuff. And might I say that just because someone's a workaholic does not mean that they are effective or a good user of their time. But yeah, I was should I just nest or should I try to work at the same time? And the tarot very vividly was sit your ass down. Well, on the work side of the pile, it gave me the hanged man. I was don't stop that. Yeah, so I'm trying not to. All right. Shauna, I enjoy you too. Thank you for joining us and adding to the discussion. It's absolutely lovely. Thank you everybody for adding to the discussion. Oh, good. Fionn heard the answer to that question. Oh, Nanda Devi. Hey, Nanda. I hope you're doing okay. Your Saturn Time Lord is retrograde. Yeah, until November. So like Reconstruction City, reorganizing, recombobulating Pisces land. Fionn does have Venus as their Time Lord. She is not mine this year, and I am thankful because she is in my seventh. Which I am going to end this hour with an anecdote about that if you want. I don't remember what your rising sign is. Rogue also has a Saturn. I do too. Saturn is also my Time Lord. Oh shit, Saturn's my Time Lord too. Oh shit, my Time Lord's retrograde. See how long it took me to figure that out? Dang. Huh. Well, I'm gonna have to sit down and think about that now. That's good. That's how it works. Thank you. Let's see. Pluto conjunct Sun. When you're at Pluto, can you also talk about Pluto conjunct Sun in the 12th house? Gal, I'm just thinking back to when we had that by transit last winter. I didn't feel very good. Granted, my sun is in the 12th, and Pluto's been with it for a long time in there. I remember being really, I mean, it was so stereotypical. It was embarrassing. It was, I was just very obsessively thinking about stuff, places, people, things that I shouldn't have been thinking about. And I wasn't telling anyone and I was hiding it. So that's what I was doing during that. If you have that in your birth chart and you have actually had time to work with that energy, that might be a whole different experience. I have not had, well, I mean, I guess I've had 15 years, but I don't know. I feel like natally, it's got to be so different than by transit. But yeah, like, I mean, think of all the ways one can undo themselves through Plutonian things, like really like, or power, like the classic corruption or self-undoing through power, through identifying with power, through chasing intense experiences. You know, maybe they're like a mountain climber and they just won't stop and then they die. Yeah, there could be so many ways of undoing the self in the manner of Pluto, and then really tying it in with like the identity. Yeah, maybe some kind of spiritual challenge. I feel like that could get flipped on its head and be like the most galvanized, strong thing on the other side of it. If like someone survived having Sun Pluto in like Capricorn in the 12th or something by birth, I guess, well, some were born, but that's like, I feel like that's someone who's galvanized between a rock and a hard place if they can get through it. Let's see here. Oh, good. People got the book. Yeah, the yoga analogy is actually of its, yeah, because I think of Saturn as like, I mean, it was the last visible planet. It's like, I love when the ancients talk about Saturn as being transcendental or transcendent. It's like, yeah, that's the last stop in the material world before we go to the fixed stars, really. So it's pretty spiritual in nature. What deck do I use? I use so many. Let me show you. Oh, this is so fun. I never get to show anyone my tarot decks. I think my other one's in my room. I actually have a separate bedroom and an office now. So I don't sleep by my desk anymore. I have the Kim Kranz Something Wild deck. It's got the cute animals. That's the one that I bring home to Minnesota to my family so I don't scare them. Because like the devil card in that one is like this cute little goat and he looks like mischievous. But I use, of course, like the classic one, the Rider Waite Tarot one. And then I have the Marigold Tarot, which I don't know. I'm not sure if I'm appropriating culture with this. Someone tell me if I am. It's really beautiful. It's illustrated by Amrit Brar, but it's all like skulls and it's very beautiful. But yeah, I use that. That one's like the deck that doesn't cut any shit. It cuts the shit. It tells me like it is. It's the harsh but stern parent that I need sometimes. And then I've got this one, which This one is The Divine Feminine by Cocorina. And it's all ladies. I call it Lady World deck because it's just topless ladies that are mermaids, most of them. It's pretty gay. I really love it. I don't know if they're listening to this, but yeah, it's not, I don't know. I haven't used this one as much. So I don't have as much of a relationship with that one. But yeah, those are my decks. I do feel like they have little different personalities. I don't know. Does anyone else feel like their decks have different vibes? I feel like I hear people talk about that. I do have the Thoth deck, but I don't use it. And it's like hidden away because it creeps me out. I have not felt how I felt about that Thoth deck, that Thoth deck, since my Furby short-circuited when I was a child and started like speaking in tongues, basically, and I had to put it outside. I don't know if anyone's Furby freaked out when they were a child, but that's how I feel. Andrew uses the Thoth deck. That is so funny. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Clearly, like, I'm not hard edge enough. I'm like too soft for the Thoth deck. I need like fuzzy animals and stuff like that. Oh, that's so funny. The Wild Unknown by Kim Krans. Thank you, Nana Devi. That is what it is. Yeah, love me that. I've also started doing the I Ching. So we've got the triad. Yeah, thank you, Andrew. That's a great topic. So let me wrap up with a fun little anecdote here, and then I'm gonna get back to work and nesting in this space. Just to give you a little tour. Oh, there's the altar. I got all my paraphernalia. Oh, that's gonna be my mirror. Oh, as my bookshelf. Very exciting. I have a closet. But anyway, I did cry today, or I hadn't cried the whole move, and then I couldn't get my pole up. I got to put my pole up, and I think it's going to go up in here. It might have to go in the living room, but it didn't fit where I wanted it to go. And I had held it together, all the stress for so many weeks, and I just wanted to dance, and then I couldn't dance, and then my Pisces moon was like, but it's all right. We're going to get it up very, very soon. Lee Cargill gives the recommendation Tarot of Ceremonial Magic by Lon Milo Dequette. We'll have to check that one out. Yeah, I'm not allowed to buy any more decks. I'm on a I could buy so many. Oh my God, it never ends. All right. FG's never had a Furby. It's okay. You didn't miss that much. They were just all right. Okay, so this is a philosophical kind of slant about using astrology and making predictions about it like far off in advance. And, you know, I think most of us who have been here for long enough kind of understand intuitively that the further out you try to predict something, of course, the harder it's going to be. And the further out we try to predict something, the less specific it's going to be. And the reason for that isn't necessarily the astrology. Like the astrology can tell us really specific things sometimes, but even like specific archetypally, even under that umbrella of like some pretty specific archetypes. So for instance, the example I'm going to use myself. So forgive me / thank you for listening. And hopefully this gives other people some value. Otherwise I wouldn't. I only try to use my own stories when I feel like it's a teaching tool or whatever. But for instance, so I'm an Aquarius rising and I've got some stuff happening across my 4th house of home, dwelling, parents, origins, ancestry, my private life, what I do in my own home. And in the 7th, my partnerships, romantic, business, clients, you know, whenever I see a client, I'm in a 1st, 7th house space, my audiences. So those are kind of the topics that we're working with. And there's an archetype of change here, you know, that's pretty specific. I can specifically say, you know, over the course of the summer of 2023, there's probably going to be some kind of, you know, benefic change, destabilizing opportunities maybe, but definitely some reconsiderations of things, changes, efforting, adjustment needed across the 7th and the 4th during this period of time. So in and of that self, that's pretty specific, archetypally. Now, a year ago, 2 years ago, I looked at these transits, I was looking at these transits, and I could only think about them from my current location and time. I could only consider the future through the lens of my current circumstances. And circumstances, of course, change. And they can change at different rates. Sometimes change happens really slowly. Sometimes it happens very quickly. And even with astrology, we can't always tell when or what those changes are always going to be, because we can't, see everything. So all to say, I think the main point is just that so far, the further ahead we get, the less context we have, the harder it is to make specific real world 3D predictions, even if I've got some specific archetypal stuff. So let's go to my specific example. 6 months ago, I was single. I had no intention of becoming not single. I was actually thinking about being a nun and how I was going to achieve that. I was getting sober. I was doing a lot of things that were not dating and were the furthest thing from that. And I actually was kind of against for a while until January, until my therapist said, and this was the unexpected thing that came up. She said, it's time for you to date. And I was like, what? But then I did. And then things changed a lot. And all of a sudden, I have a whole different context that, okay, yeah, 6 months ago, I could have easily predicted, yep, there's going to be some kind of change dealing with partners and home. And maybe it's cool because the benefics are here. Like maybe I could have said that, but in my context, through the lens of my context last December, 6 months ago, I was like, no way, that's not it. You know what this is going to be about? This is going to be about my clients and my client work. And it's going to be about spending time with my family or my parents or something like that. I was changing a lot of things in my private life. I was trying to get work-life balance in order so that I could have the client practice of my dreams, basically. And that was how I was looking at this. That was the only context I was willing to really examine this in, even though in the back of my head, I knew, okay, it could be this romantic stuff, but whatever, that's not real. Well, sure as shit, I just moved in with a beautiful man. So like, oops. So it just goes to show like context is so important. And even like things that we see in the future that we ourselves are rejecting already, from kind of even a casual kind of place, we really have to try to keep an open mind. I think that's the lesson that I learned that I wanted to share. Just keep an open mind, because like, especially if you're worrying about something that's like a year in advance, if you're looking at your solar return chart 10 years from now, the more and more I do this, the more and more that feels like a waste of time. And I mean, I don't think it totally is. Like, I think there's, of course, especially thinking about mundane astrology or something like that, or, maybe there's an important election, buying a home 3 or 4 years from now. There's plenty of reasons to look very far ahead. But when it comes to like our personal transits and stuff, and we're just kind of willy-nilly, like worrying about our solar return chart 10 years from now, like this experience has just shown me how futile it is. So I hope that you get that out of this too, or that was of some value. But that's my story. I'm very happy. I'm very excited. I feel like a whole new existence here, and I'm looking forward to reaching homeostasis here now. So no more beige cave. All of the thanks to my Swedish prison cell for my 12th house year. It was a perfect little 12th housey thing. But happily, I'm at my half birthday and I am already out of my little cave. So, does anyone have any final questions, any final concerns? Thank you, Lee. Thank you, FG. Thank you, Kun. Thank you, Shauna. It's good to see all of you. Hi, Adam. Oh, friend told them to get her Thoth deck from her house, and now it's on Adam's shelf, just chilling. Yeah, I'm sure it's a great deck. Don't let me don't let me discourage anybody. It might be the perfect deck for you. You never know. Mm. So I use what do you say in FG? Sounds like the 12th house is the opposite house of the 6th and shared. Oh, I appreciate that. I don't know exactly what you mean there, but I'm going to take it as compliment. I think that's all I have. I mean, I have more, but we don't need to do it now. Yeah. So again, I'm going to be expanding this eventually. I just don't know how yet or why. Thank you for everyone who sent in questions. I appreciate you so much. Thank you for everyone who shared their questions live today. It is so brave to ask questions. I was just recently, someone on Twitter, I think it was Tassine, asked like, what you mean when you say that's a good question. And my response to that was like, when I say, oh, that was a good question, what I usually mean by that is maybe a few things. One of the things is like, I'm secretly saying, thank you for being brave and asking a question, because it's a very vulnerable thing to do. And also other people probably have the same question. So you're probably helping them out. So it's very, very helpful act of bravery. The other thing too, is like, sometimes it's a question that I get a lot. And so it just covers a lot of ground for a lot of people. That's a good question. Or sometimes it is just like a really novel, unique, interesting, fun thing to think about. And that's also a good question. I don't really believe in bad questions necessarily. I believe in ineffective questions that maybe aren't asked correctly. Kind of like when we have to ask horary a question, like you got it, or tarot, we have to be thoughtful about our questions, or the I Ching, we shouldn't just willy-nilly ask a silly question. But I don't think there's such a thing as a bad question as long as it's asked sincerely. I don't think there is such a thing. So I don't know why I got off on that whole little tangent, but thank you everybody for your questions. That's all I have. So I'll see y'all next month. I'm going to put all the things that I linked below. I'm going to do timestamps. It does take me a minute. And then I don't even think I've scheduled my next office hour. I have not. So I have no idea. I have no idea when we're going to talk about August, but we will, and it'll be in the last week of July. So watch out for that. I am at www.aligninglightastrology.com for my website. That is where you can find my writings, my events, my booking, all the information about my services. I do have a sliding scale. I am also part of Chris Brennan's referral program. So you can use the discount code Astrology Podcast, and that'll give you 10% off on any of my services. If you are 55 or older, I have a senior citizen discount, which is also 10% off. That's thank you 10. And hell, you know what? If you were here today, I mean, you can use the Astrology Podcast one, but thank you 10 for you as well. So sign up for my newsletter. That is also on my website, www.aligninglightastrology.com. I send out a newsletter every month that keeps us up to date on events and my practice and everything that's going on. And there's usually some discount codes in there as well. But yeah, that's what I have. So thank you so much, everyone, for your participation and your beautiful time and energy. And I hope you all have a good night. Bye-bye.